All right. Hello and welcome to the Parsha class this evening. Parsha this week is Parsha Shelach. Quick summary of the Parsha before we get into the greater details. The Jewish people send 12 spies, Meraglim, to scope out the land of Israel. Of the 12, 10 of them come back with a negative report. And the people are nervous, they get scared, and they don't believe Moshe, they don't believe the two spies, Yeshua and Kalev, who tell them that everything's going to be fine, and the people cry, and that is the famous punishment would be meted out to them for that. The entire Tisha B'Av and all of its consequences began with that particular day. That night of crying, that they cried for no reason, Hashem would give them a reason to cry. And that's, of course, it's not just like sort of a punishment, like, you cried for no reason, so now I'll give you a reason, like maybe to torture them. But
Well, I always said that.
I'm sorry?
I always would say it like that, like, oh, you cried for no reason? But
Right.
I guess.
But Hashem's not that cruel. So it's really the point is that the same midot, the same characteristics that led the Jewish people to have lack of faith, at this point, are the same sins that come back around. History is not just a straight line. History is is more or less a circle, and things repeat themselves. Obviously, in without some of the same details. Right, the character of Napoleon Bonaparte is going to happen once, but similar conquests of parts of the world are going to have happened before, will happen again, and have happened in between. The rest of the parsha that is also worth mentioning, obviously, is the Jewish people, because they feel the way Rashi explains it anyway, because the Jewish people feel so forlorn and so lost, and so like there's no chance we'll ever get to Israel. So Hashem promises them gives them several mitzvot which imply that there has to be a Jewish presence in Israel. So, for example, the wine libations that came with the offerings, the mitzvah of chafrashat challah, taking challah, is a mitzvah that's particular to the land of Israel. You can obviously, as people do, you can do it elsewhere, but the whole idea of we don't really do it completely nowadays, do we? We take the challah, but we don't give it to the kohen. But that was part of the process of taking the challah. There are certain offerings, individual offerings, the sins of idolatry. The Torah concludes this parsha with two more important things. One is the makoshesh eitzim, the person who was either gathering sticks or putting together sticks or making a pile of whatever he was doing with sticks. He somehow broke Shabbat, and by breaking Shabbat, he gets the punishment, and there's consequences to that, of course. And finally, last but not least, the Torah gives us the third paragraph of the Shema, the mitzvah of tzitzit, and the techelet that goes on the tzitzit. All of that is in this week's parsha, and we dealt in quite some detail last year. In fact, we spent well over half of the class talking about techelet and what it is and what it isn't, and what it might be and what it probably isn't, and some of the halachic ramifications of that. So that was in the class last year. You can definitely check that out on YouTube. Meanwhile, I think what I'd like to do today is I'd like to focus on another part of the parsha, in the beginning, actually, not the very beginning, not like Bereshit, but you know what I mean by beginning. So let me share the screen here. If I can do this correctly, here we go. Baruch Hashem. Okay. Okie dokie. Here we are. This is the source sheet for this week's parsha, and very famous, very important questions that we need to deal with to get a good understanding of what happened in the Parsha and in Jewish history, and to understand Torah. It says in chapter 13, verse 3, it says, "V'yishlach otam Moshe mi'bar Sinai." These messengers, these spies, were sent out by Moshe from the wilderness of Paran, this particular part of the wilderness where they are at the time, right, outside of Israel, this place called Paran, al pi Hashem, through the mouth of Hashem, Kulam anashim Rashi b'nei Yisrael hema. All of these people were great leaders of the Jewish people, influential people, the way Rav Hirsch understands it. But if you look at these words carefully, it certainly seems, although Rashi does not learn it this way, and we'll get a very good idea of how Rashi understands it in a moment, but those words, al pi Hashem. So why did Moshe send the spies? If anybody just throws this verse at you without any context and says, why did Moshe send the spies? It would seem like Moshe sent the spies al pi Hashem, because Hashem commanded him, which would indicate at least that it's nobody's fault that the spies were sent. They were supposed to be sent because Hashem wanted them sent. So later on, when we get to Parshat Devarim and other places, when we get to commentaries that seem to imply that Moshe sent them on his own, Hashem didn't want them to be sent, and the Jewish people were wrong in sending them, all of that seems strange, no? If we're saying that al pi Hashem, through the command, it seems like through the command of Hashem, these spies were sent. So we're going to have a total of 2 answers to how we can understand these 3 words that are very different than what you might expect. The first is going to come from the Kli Yakar, right? The Kli Yakar. So he explains, he's one of the Mikraot Gedolot, he's one of the main classic commentaries on the Torah. So it says, Al pi Hashem, lo haya hashlichut al pi Hashem. It's not that the sending was through the mouth of Hashem. It's not that Hashem didn't command Moshe to send. Shaharei amar lo shlach lecha. He said, send for yourself. Which Rashi, by the way, this is the as promised, this is what Rashi says. Lecha ledatcha hule. Rashi says, according to your own will, if you want to send spies. So then it is Moshe's fault that the spies were sent, or at least the Jewish people's fault, or something like that. Hashem never commanded it. So then if Hashem didn't command it, what does al pi Hashem mean? So he says it's not the shlichut, it's not the sending them that Hashem commanded. Ela rotze lomar she'ashlichut midbar paran haya al pi Hashem. It's that Hashem wanted them sent from this particular place in Paran. Let's fit that back into the verse, if you don't mind. All right? V'yishlach otam Moshe midbar Paran. Moshe sent the spies from midbar Paran al pi Hashem, as Hashem commanded. In other words, not that he commanded him to send, but if you are going to send, you have to send them from there, from Paran. Now, why do you have to send from Paran? Send from anywhere. What is this particular geographic spot? What does that have to do with anything?
Also, I'm sorry, is there like when everybody gives Devar Torahs about like Hashem wanting the Jews to like have spies or whatever, or agrees to it, it's from this verse?
It's mostly from, as we'll get to it in Devarim, in the very beginning of Devarim, Hashem, there's a sort of recap of this particular incident, that there's a lot more indication there that Hashem did not want the Jewish people to send spies, and it was a lack of their trust in him that they sent the spies. That's that. But here the question is, why is Hashem commanding? He's basically saying, I don't want you to send, but if you want to send, go ahead and send. But Here's a very important thing. Make sure, no matter what happens, if you are going to send the spies, send them from Paran. Like what's like everything hinges on this spot. Like it has to be from Paran. What's going on? So wrote Solomon Shashlichud Midbar Paran Haya al Pi H-Shem Masa Harishon Mechatzerot, which is, by the way, the first of their travels. Right? They traveled from, as it was clear in last week's parsha, they traveled from Har Sinai and they went to Paran, Midbar Paran. Ki lefi divrei Hashem Yitbarach lo haya mesachim lishloach klal. Really, Hashem didn't want them to send at all. Ach l'rov fartzeim lo micha behem. Mikomokom haya lo la'achar zman hashlichut she'arei b'midbar Paran kama masod. He didn't want a lot of different travels. He wanted them, this very first travel from Har Sinai, from Paran. This is the place to descend ad smoch la'aretz, which is close to the land. Vayalo l'shloach mahanea acheret l'smucha Eretz Yisrael yoter min midbar Paran. Even though theoretically there would have been closer spots to Israel to send from, but he wanted them specifically sent from Paran. El lefi chania zu shel midbar Paran. Why particularly Paran? Hayta miyad bevoa mechatzerot shekara sham masa shel Miriam. Because that's where, in Paran, is close to, or exactly where, the whole incident with Miriam occurred. What's the incident with Miriam? Remember, Miriam, at the end of last week's Parsha, however we're going to interpret it, let's just get basically, she spoke Lashon Hara about Moshe. Now, I know it wasn't really Lashon Hara on her level. It was a bad thing, but on anybody else speaking the way she spoke about her brother, and for good reason, and hoping to change and try to fix things, whatever else her intentions were, that's irrelevant. Right now, as far as, obviously, in the Torah itself, she is punished. Obviously, the Torah itself considers it a great, terrible thing that she did. So obviously, we have to understand it at least that way for now. And then, God willing, in future years, we can go back to last week's Parsha and discover exactly how bad Miriam's sin was. But regardless of all that, Miriam sinned. She spoke Lashon Hara. And the beginning of this week's Parsha, Rashi tells us, the very first Rashi in this week's Parsha, that the reason that this week's Parsha follows last week's Parsha so directly is because the spies should have learned the lesson of Miriam. They should have learned the lesson from Miriam, but that would have been a very difficult lesson to learn if that lesson happened a while ago, a lot of different travels ago, right? Oh, that happened all the way. That's so last week, right? It's been a hot minute since that's happened, so I don't remember that incident. How am I supposed to learn from it? It wasn't supposed to be a minute ago. It was supposed to have just happened. That's why you're being sent from Paran, exactly from Paran, because that's where this happened. The incident of Miriam happened, and then you got sent from Paran. And the whole intent was that you would go to Eretz Yisrael with that kavanah, with that intent, with that knowledge, that foreknowledge that you can't speak negatively about things, even for the best of reasons. Sometimes, I mean, I'm not paskening halacha here. There are times when you're allowed to speak lashon hara. This is not the point here. But what the spies did was definitely wrong, obviously, to get punished for it. And Rashi says in the very beginning they should have learned from Miriam. How were they supposed to have learned from Miriam? Because it was supposed to have happened right away. They should have been sent from Paran, which they were, by the way, but they still didn't learn the lesson, which is why they got punished. But that's what al pi Hashem means. Hashem is commanding, you're going to send the spies? Fine, send the spies. But make sure you send them from Paran, not later on, not a few travels later, not when you pitch your tent, a few miles down the road. No, I want you to go from here, where you should have learned the lesson of Miriam. That's where you need to be sent from. That's the opinion of the Kli Yakar. And again, it's beautiful because, again, we're sort of explaining the understanding that Hashem did not want the spies to be sent. And then on the other hand, we're explaining that Al Pi Hashem, which is definitely seems to be very damning for Hashem. This seems to be like evidence that Hashem did indeed send them. They're being sent Al Pi Hashem, not being sent Al Pi Hashem. It's Mimidbar Paran, that's Al Pi Hashem. And now we're going to fast forward a few hundred years to the 1970s, 1980s, where Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky spoke the words that were later collected into the work called Emet LiYaakov, the Sefer on Chumash, other things as well. And Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky asks the exact same question. He gives a completely different answer, very beautiful answer, but also, again, answering the question of Al Pi Hashem. So again, he quotes Rashi, Al Pi Hashem Birshuto. It was on Moshe. It was not Hashem. It was not Hashem commanding him to do it. He had a choice. He had a reshut. He had his druthers, as they used to say, right? Shalo achav al yado ad kan shono aval zahu dachuk. This is dachuk ma'od. This is very difficult, Lomar. It's difficult to say this. Shema shalo ikav al yado ze yikra al pi Hashem. If you're going to say that you sent him on, through the word of Hashem, so it's very difficult to say that he wasn't being commanded. But he quotes the Mizrahi, or not quotes, he references the Mizrahi, the Gur Aryeh, that they deal with this issue as well. He's going to ask also a number of other questions. Also, by the way, famous questions on the Parsha. And this is a long piece of Rav Yaakov. We're probably not going to get through all of it right now, but he also asks why, at the very beginning of this Parsha, as you'll see, Moshe changes the name of Hoshea bin Nun to Yehoshua. And it's sort of a strange place to do it, beyond the point that, this is kind of an obvious point, but he's been called Yehoshua before. It's not like he just changed his name, or at least doesn't seem like he just changed his name. It seems a little strange that we're bringing it up now. Od Sarach Bir, we also have to explain Shehifsik Ben Tikun Shemo Shel Yehoshua L'Shemot Anashim B'Zah. And also, especially if you learn this according to Rashi, if you learn the Torah according to Rashi, which is an important thing to do, definitely for basics, it's very strange. Why did Moshe change Yehoshua's name? If you're going to tell me that he changed his name because it was sort of like a prayer that he not get mixed up with the spies, so that implies, first of all, that Moshe knew what was going on. He knew that they were going to come back with a bad report. And then it's kind of strange that he sent these people, right? I know you're going to send a bad report, so I'll send you anyway. No. And if he thinks he's that changing somebody's name is going to change them from saying something bad to something good, like as it happened with Yehoshua, so he didn't change Kalev's name. Interesting point. He also didn't change any of the other spies' names. Good old Ben Vavsi could have been changed, to something else. There's a number of funny names of people who were sent to spy out the land, and none of their names are changed except for Hoshea being changed to Yehoshua. So this is all sort of a side point. Maybe we'll deal with it more in future years, but it's definitely an interesting question. Right, so why did he change his name? Why now? Why is this being mentioned now? Why didn't he change other people's names? All these are part of the beauty of the depths of Torah, but not for now. Back to Rav Yaakov. He says, Nira, Mikol Zeh Lebir et Ha'inin, to explain this point, who the Hine La'alan Pashat Dvarim, he quotes Pashat Dvarim, as I said before. Pashat Dvarim has a recap of this event, chapter 1, verse 22. Katuv Tikruvun Alai Kilaken Hamul Nishlacha Anashim Lefanenu Yachrupu Lanu et Haaretz. You sent these people. Pirish Rashi Sham, and Rashi says there Tikruvum Alai Kilibam Arbubia. Right, they had the wrong intent. Yeladim duchfim et hazkenim. So the people came in a whole mixed up order. The young people in front of the old people. Zakenim duchfim et rishayim et roshim. The older people in front of the leaders. In other words, people came. The fact that they came in such a mixed up mass, and they didn't even have respect for the quote unquote hierarchy of how people should usually be led. So that shows that they had this negative intent to begin with. So really, what was going on? What led to the sin of the spies? It was this arbuvia, that this mixing up, this lack of respect for not only the hierarchy, but really what causes our hierarchy. Granted, this is perhaps my own personal political cynicism showing, but granted that it's maybe okay not to respect authority when the authority is haphazard, right? When the authority is not how shall you say, is undeserving, right? But the whole hierarchy in Judaism is based, or should be based, on what people deserve, on greatness in Torah study, greatness in learning, greatness in tzidkut, and kindness to others, etc. All the things that you would expect from a good Jewish leader. That's what makes our that's what makes our hierarchy. It's not random. It's not, oh, we like your face, we like your last name, your father was nice to us, so that's not, you bribed us well. Those aren't reasons to fit people into a hierarchy. And when, by the way, just worth pointing out, this fits in with what we said earlier, the very fact that the Jewish people did that then and would repeat that same problem, would repeat that same lack of proper respect for proper people who deserved it, lack of deserving respect, I should say. Right? So the this lack of deserving respect repeated itself in the time of the Second Temple, which is the reason for the destruction of the temple. So again, the sins that the people did then led to the same behaviors, led to the later destructions of the Beit HaMikdash and the whole entire situation of Galut. And not only, I mean, I could go on and on about this, but this is a sort of a Tisha B'Av vort, and it's a little too early for me to be thinking about Tisha B'Av. But if you think about it, many times, many of our exiles, many of the destructions of the Jewish communities throughout Europe and the Arab lands that have occurred in the last 2,000 years, a lot of times they were precipitated by this lack of respect for Torah and Torah authority. All right, like I said, not for now, but just something to think about, putting on the back burner. If we have to have a Tisha B'Av this year, we'll have to come back to this idea in about a month or so. All right, month and a half, whatever it is. Okay. So he said, he really what that means is, when they come in this arbuvia, when they come in this mixture, this mixed up mass of people who, without any respect for the proper order of things, what they're really saying is, we don't trust you, we don't trust the Torah, and we don't trust Hashem. Because Hashem gave us the Torah, Hashem gave us that hierarchy of our leadership, and we don't really care about our leadership anymore. We're just going to go and attack you, Moshe. So that means that we're indeed not interested in, we don't really think Hashem is going to do what he said he's going to do. Hashem amar lahem she'alu v'yikavshu et ha'aretz, Moshe amar lahem Moshe, Right. So as it's very clear, they said we're not gonna conquer this land. It's impossible. And even though Hashem said, "Don't worry, don't be afraid," you came to me barbuvia yesh kan sakanat nefashot with the eva lishloach meraglim. You came like it was an urgent that we send the spies because you didn't trust that Hashem was going to take care of us. Hine al ikar hatzetam lishloach meraglim ktuv parshat dvarim. Vitav be'inai hadavar ve'ekach mekem shnayim asar anashim. So Moshe sends these spies because it was good in his eyes what you asked them to do. Bir hadavar, and the explanation of the explanation of this is hu kemo shebuar Ramban v'parshat b'chukotai, as Ramban says in b'chukotai, shehashgachad Hashem yitbarach al ha'adam halui bishur habitachon shel adam. This would be a great bumper sticker. Hashem's hashgachat, Hashem's overseeing of a person is connected to, hangs on the amount of trust that person has in Hashem. In other words, and this is a classic thought, the Chazon Ish writes about this regarding the Emunah B'tachon, especially when it comes to Yosef and how he failed in his bitachon somewhat in trusting too much in the butler. The idea is that the greater a person is, the more faith a person has in Hashem, the less hishtadlut, the less actual labor towards a goal that person has to do. You can trust more in Hashem if you trust in Hashem, right? So those people who say, "Oh, I don't have to work. Hashem will take care of me." If they really, really believe that, that might be true for those people, right? The more you believe in Hashem that He's going to take care of everything, right? You have to be honest with yourself. Obviously, this is not. By the way, this is not personal advice here, but certainly not from not a good way to judge my bitachon. So the work that a person does, the amount of labor that a person does, is somehow parallel. Somehow there's some sort of a congruency with how much faith that person has in Hashem. And since these people did not believe in Hashem, which is why they came in this big mass attacking Moshe, that's why Moshe decided to send the spies. The people who he represented made it very clear that they did not have bitachon in Hashem. They didn't trust in Hashem. So if they don't trust in Hashem, so Hashem is not going to protect them. So what Moshe has to do is he has to send spies. That's the normal course of action. Whenever a country is about to go and attack another country, they need to, send people ahead of them to scope out the land. They need to scout out what's going on. Moshe had to do that because these people they proved to him without a doubt that they had doubt, right? Kolomar, this is like what all other countries do, etc. And then he says, this is like those wars that Israel was allowed to fight on their own. In other words, without a command, without self-defense. If they wanted to, they could attack a neighboring country for whatever reason, resources or whatever. When there was a Jewish kingdom in Israel, Bishat Hanhagat Malchut Israel, but they had to do a very important thing. Shishalu Bu'urim V'tumim. Before they attacked that other country, they needed to consult with the Urim V'tumim, the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol, which spoke to them prophetically, and Hashem, through the breastplate, would tell the people whether to fight or not, how many soldiers to send, etc., etc. So Ella Shikan lo hutzruchu l'shoel Ella et mi yishal. So Haita Hatshuva Lamata Ruven Shmuel ben Zachor Mata Shimon Shfat ben Churi, etc. Mata Ephraim Yeshua ben Nun. So then Moshe has to send these people. What Rav Yaakov is alluding to here, by the way, is that when it says Moshe sent al pi Hashem, it's like the Urim V'Tumim, which is the word of Hashem. Moshe judged that the people needed to have these people sent because of how much Hashem's protection was on the people, or in this case, wasn't on the people. Because again, Hashem's help is proportionate to a person's faith, and al pi Hashem then means that they had to use sometimes the Urim V'Tumim, and they had to use the Torah, use what Hashem gave them in order to make these kinds of big decisions. And the big decision here is whether to send spies or not. So that had to be done through Hashem. And that's why at this point, it's mentioned that Moshe changed the name of Yoshua. The Mitzinu Parshat Pinchas, Shal Lo Mishpat Urim is over there in Parshat Pinchas, as we're going to see soon enough, that we asked, that the question was asked from the Urim, Mipnei Hashem, again, Al Piv. So saying, using the words, using the mouth, Al Pi Hashem, that's an indication of using the Urim V'Tumim. Elisha Urim V'Tumim Hashiv Lamate Ephraim Hoshea bin Nun. It's the Urim V'Tumim that told Moshe to change the name of Hoshea ben Nun to Yoshua. Lefichach v'odiya haTorah shezu haita sham harisa. Aval Moshe achar sheha'alhu gedola hina al shemo Yoshua v'chein nikra b'malchemet Amalek v'yom Hashem el Yoshua b'char lanu anashim. So it's very clear, obviously, that earlier, Moshe used the name of Yoshua when he sent them to, for example, fight against Amalek. Back in Shemot, many Chumashim ago, back in Shemot 1789. No, can't be 1789. 17:9, I think it is. Whatever it is. So Ubir Ha'inyan Zeh, he explains shebe'emet hatshuva be'urim be'tumim lo hayta tamid lefi ma sheha'emet tzricha liot al hatshuva ba hadiukat lefi hashala. The answer urim v'tumim is not an answer forever; it's an answer for now. It's current events. It's not history. Right? If you're going to ask the Urim V'Tumim questions, the breastplate of the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol, the answer is going to be the answer for right now. And he quotes different places in Shoftim and other places where the Urim V'Tumim is thus consulted. And only when it's asked, only when the question is asked correctly, does the Urim V'Tumim answer the word of Hashem. K'mo kein haba shafal pi sheikar shluach hameraglim haya shelo kirtzon hamakom. Even though really the sending of the spies was not something Hashem would have wanted. But the fact that they asked the Urim V'Tumim lo haya im l'shloach ele es mi l'shloach. So all what they asked the Urim V'Tumim was whom to send. L'chein al zeh ba hatshuva lemate Ruven Shmuel ben Zachor. And then the Urim V'Tumim said from the Ruven sent Shmuel ben Zachor. Kolomar hachi mesugal v'shevet Ruven l'shlichut zu hu Shmuel ben Zachor ben Shapir nikra shlichut zu al pi Hashem. So the sending of the spies, the al pi Hashem, is that the actual spies were chosen al pi Hashem. Sending was not something Hashem wanted, but which spies were sent? That's al pi Hashem, and Hashem chose Hoshea ben Nun. which is, as we know, whom Moshe called Yehoshua, and that's why that's mentioned here. And that's basically what Yaakov is saying. And again, this answers the question of what Al Pi Hashem means, if it doesn't mean that Hashem is commanding Moshe to send the spies, which is obviously something Hashem would not want them to do. But because of their lack of faith, Hashem gave them less of a hashgacha, less protection, and Moshe realized that what they needed now was to connect back to Hashem, which is through the Urim V'Tumim. Okay. We are going to fast forward a whole 30 verses to chapter 13, verse 33. Just an interesting Gemara there. The Gemara in Sota 34, 35 spends quite a bit of time going into the details of the verses of the Meraglim and describing their sin. It's kind of an interesting piece here, worth a look. It says there, the spies say, "V'shamra inu at the Nephilim." We saw the Nephilim there. Nephilim were the fallen ones. Some people translate that as the fallen angels or giants, or people who were very, very big and looked like they were giants, whatever. Bnei Anak, Mina Nephilim. They were the sons of Anak, and they were the Nephilim. V'nehi be'inenu kechagavim, and in our eyes, we were like hagavim, which is grasshoppers. V'chein hayinu be'inehem, and similarly were we in their eyes like grasshoppers. So this is again part of the negative report that the spies tried to scare the Jewish people with. The people in Israel are huge. They're gigantic. They're monsters. They're giants, and we look like little ants in front of them. That's what they said. And Rashi quotes the first half of this Gemara in his commentary on the Torah, but I thought it would be interesting for you to at least see that the Gemara has a response to Rashi. As the right, so we were like grasshoppers in our eyes and in their eyes. Amar Rav Misharshia. Rav Misharshia said, "Meraglim shakre havu." The Meraglim were liars. How do you know they're liars? Makes sense that they might have thought to themselves that they look like grasshoppers. That makes sense. But we were like grasshoppers in their eyes. They had no right to say that. They aren't mind readers. Now, how do they know what the giants are thinking, that they look like grasshoppers to them? That's impossible. You don't know that. So that's what Rashi says, and Rashi quotes this as one of the proofs that the spies were sinning, that they did the wrong thing. By the way, we don't need too many proofs. The Torah itself tells us very clearly that they sinned, but what exactly was the sin? So a lot of the Bali Musa point out that what was really the crux of the sin of the spies is what they thought of themselves. They thought they looked like grasshoppers in the eyes of these giants, and they have no right to think that way. We have no right to think negatively about ourselves. Usually, this is again experience I've noticed from people who've spoken to me about this. Very often, the mistakes that people make, the sins that people do, let's call it, come from a lack of a self-esteem. They read somewhere something that there's no way to get forgiveness for this particular sin, so they're pretty much given up. They've dropped out. They're off the, whatever you want to call, off the road, off the derech, right? They've given up on their connection to Hashem. Hashem doesn't love me anymore. I've done such and such a thing. You have no right to say that. You can't see things from Hashem's eyes. By the way, if you did see things through Hashem's eyes, you'd know that even in this week's Parsha, where the Jewish people made about as bad of a sin as you could possibly do, they literally, this is not for now, but they literally attacked Moshe and Aaron. They literally didn't trust the two people who led them out of Egypt through the sea, received the Torah, is teaching them, they're teaching them the Torah. They are rebelling against these people, and they're still forgiven because still Hashem loves them. Yeah, true, they don't get into Israel. They don't deserve that. We get some sort of punishment. We get punishments for things, it's true, but Hashem loves us so much that there's still a degree of forgiveness. It's worth knowing. He didn't obliterate the Jewish people at this point. Right? There's still the rest of Sefer Bamidbar with the same characters, more or less. All right. Anyway, so that's the first half. That's what Rashi quotes. But we got a problem here. How do they know that? V'lahi. That maybe not. Maybe they did know that these Nephilim thought that they looked like grasshoppers. Why? Ihavu mivre avele. There's a lot of funerals going on at the time, and during these funerals, tuti arze havu mavri v'chichazinhu. Stilku us vatvi yatvi bi'ilane. So they went to sit after their funerals. We're not the only ones who have a meal after funeral. So these mourning Nephilim who were having funeral after funeral left and right, they went to have a post-funeral meal under a tree, and that's where the spies were, and the spies saw them coming, so they went and hid in the tree. Shami, and they heard the Amri, the Amri, they heard these Nephilim say, Kazinan inche de damu bekamtse bilane. There's little bugs that look like people in the trees. Right? In other words, they're not lying that they said that the Nephilim thought that were bugs. They heard the Nephilim say that. So that's why they thought that. That's why they're not liars. And then that pretty much shoots that whole Musar vort, in the foot. But either way, that's the pasuk as we have it. Okay. As I was saying earlier, there's a famous mitzvah in this week's parsha, the mitzvah of tzitzit, and it's a mitzvah that's primarily for men, true, and women. It says get the reward for tzitzit by preparing them, even maybe perhaps making them for their husbands, for their children, etc. I'm not encouraging anybody to make tzitzit. It's not an easy thing to do, and there's quite a bit of intent to have. But the verse says, "V'hayal lachem l'tzitzit," and these things will be for you tzitzit, whatever that means. We're going to translate it as what Safari translates it as fringes. Ritem oto, and you're going to see them as a chartem et kol mitzvot Hashem, and you're going to remember all of the laws of Hashem. V'asitem otam, and you're going to do them. V'lo taturu achrei levavchem v'achrei inechem. You're not going to follow after your hearts and after your eyes. Asher atem zonim achrehem. That will try to encourage you to follow after them. So it's worth mentioning. I'm assuming we're a mature group. It's worth mentioning that the tzitzit on a man are in the around the hips, right, in the central region. And there's quite a bit of talk in the Gemara, the Talmud, that really the intent of tzitzit is for to encourage sexual purity, right? You don't want to follow your eyes and your heart just without any lack. If you lack self-control, you'll jump at anybody, which is not obviously a Jewish thing. It's not a Gentile thing at this point. So it's definitely discouraged. We want to have people. We want people to have self-control, and even things that they want to do and things they think they should do. even that requires some thought and meditation before doing anything like that. But what I'd like to focus on right now is how is the structure of tzitzit supposed to work? Now, there are different customs to how they're supposed to be tied. And Rashi tells us in this commentary that if you count the knots and the strings and everything else, it comes out to tzitzit, and that's the mitzvah. And so you remember, if you're thinking about gematrias and numbers, when you're looking at these things, you'll remember H-Shem, and you'll stay on the straight and narrow, and you'll follow the mitzvot and not make any mistakes. All right. Let's fast forward though from Rashi. Let's get another 500 years after Rashi to the Shulchan Aruch of Yosef Karo, who writes in Orach Chaim Chet chapter 8, halacha 8, v'kavin shehatatofo litzavanu Hashem HaKadosh Baruch Hu lahit'atef bo k'dei sheniskor kol mitzvotav la'asotam. So when the kavana that you should have when you hit'atef, when you wrap yourself in them, is that Hashem commanded you to do this wrapping, to wrap yourself in tzitzit. Really, he's talking about the talit gadol, right? The talit, right? Which is also tzitzit. So it's to remember all the mitzvot that we're supposed to do. That's all he says. And if we fast forward another 400 years or so to the beginning of the 1900s, late 1800s, the beginning of the 1900s, to the Mishnah Berurah, the Chafetz Chaim's famous commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, and he writes, and he writes that the intent we should have is zehu milvad hakavana shetarach lekavin bilbisha lekayim mitzvot tzitzit. You should have this intent when you're putting on tzitzit. A man putting on tzitzit should be thinking, I'm putting on these tzitzit to remember all of the other mitzvot. Right? The Katav Habach, right? The Bayit Chadash, father-in-law of the Taz, 1600s, I guess, right? So he writes, Shekain Hadim b'tefillin v'sukkah. The same rule applies with tefillin and sukkah. Why these three? Why tzitzit, tefillin, and sukkah? Af shebir mitzvot yotze af shelo mekavin ba'davar. Ki im she'osa mitzvah l'shem Hashem she'itziva lo asota hanach she'ani she'b'tzitzit k'tiv l'man tizkut tefillin l'man tiyeh Torah Hashem b'ficha v'sukkah l'man teidei dorotechem. In general, we don't do mitzvot, take this back. The exact reason for a mitzvah isn't usually given. But when it is given, the Torah itself gives you the reason for the mitzvah. Like, this mitzvah is there for you to remember other mitzvot. So then you should have to have that kavana. You should have to have that intent when you're doing that mitzvah. Why else are you doing it? In other words, if you're sitting in a sukkah, and you have no intent, no idea at all that your ancestors sat in booths when they were, traversing the wilderness on their way to Israel from Egypt, right? If you're not thinking about that at all, are you even in a sukkah? Are you even getting the mitzvah of sukkah at all? If usually you would say, you don't need to have kavana, you did the mitzvah, the most important thing is to actually do it. It's only secondary to think about why you're doing it. But that might not be true, says the Bach, when the mitzvah is very clear, the reason for the mitzvah is very clear in the Torah itself, right? The tzitzit, it says, so you'll remember. With tefillin, it says, so that you'll keep the Torah of Hashem in your mouth. And with sukkah, it says, so that you'll remember for all your generations that your ancestors sat in booths on their way to to Israel. So in all of these three cases, the intent is in the Torah. So maybe that means you have to think these things. That's the opinion of the Bach. and the Mishnah Berurah quotes it. Then he says, Mikol Makom, nevertheless, Nira, seems to me the kol ze lechatchila. This is ideally, yes, you should have that kavanah. Yes, if you can, you do. Kedei lekayem hamitzvah bishleimuta, in order to fulfill the mitzvah in its completeness. Aval b'di'eved, but after the fact, you already sat in the sukkah, you had your meal. Now what? Af im lo kivin b'chol elu. If you didn't think about any of these things, you didn't have the intent. Rak lekayem hamitzvah, hamitzvat asa. You still fulfilled the positive commandment yatsa. You still did it. Achar kach metzati b'pri megadim. He quotes Pri Megadim. He says similarly, and some other commentaries as well. Shafilu b'tzitzit ein hakavana li'ikuva. So even with regard to tzitzit, this intent isn't necessary. Sorry, it's not me'akev, which doesn't mean it's not necessary. It means that you can still fulfill the mitzvah even without this intent, which is significant. And by the way, this is the Mishnah Berurah. Not everybody agrees with this, which is common in halacha. There are differences of opinion, so I'm not paskening here or anything like that. But what's significant, what's important for us to know at this point is that first of all, it's always important to have kavanah. It's always important to think things, to think about why you're doing what you're doing. The issue that the Mishnah Berurah is bringing up is b'di'eved. If you forgot, or if you weren't thinking about it, if you were sleepy, if you were half asleep in the middle of shul when you said Shema, does that count? Ideally you should say Shema with intent, to be mekabel ol malchut shemayim, to take on the responsibilities of the kingdom of heaven. However, if you didn't for whatever reason, what does that mean? Does that mean you didn't do anything? Might as well have stayed home? No, you fulfilled something. You're yotze, you're yotzi. However, obviously the ideal is these are Torah commandments, and when you do them, especially the ones where it says what the intent should be, especially for those three things, again, tzitzit, tefillin, and sukkah, at least one of those is quite relevant to women, right? In most communities. Ideally, of course, for those mitzvot especially, you should think about why you're doing them, when you're doing them, and then you'll fulfill the mitzvah, as the Mishnah Berurah says, bishleimut, in its completeness. Right, and that's all I have for you for the class tonight. Thank you for joining me. I'm going to stop the live feed to Facebook. If you have any questions, this would be a great time to ask. Finally, have the opportunity to do that.